Alf Ramsey was the first, and to date only English manager to win a World Cup final, but he was not the first English manager to reach one. That honour belongs to George Raynor, who led Sweden to the 1958 World Cup final when they were the hosts. George Raynor's management career is one of the most bizarre and fascinating in the history of football. He had 3 separate spells managing the Swedish national team, and also managed the likes of Iraq, Juventus, Lazio, Skegness Town and Doncaster Rovers. His tale is a strange one, but one that deserves to be retold. This is a story of Sweden to Skegness, the career of George Raynor. George Raynor was born on the 13th of January 1907 in Hoyland Common, a town in South Yorkshire. He played in the lower leagues of English football throughout his career, turning out for the likes of Mansfield Town, Rotherham, Bury and Aldershot. His playing career would end in 1939, the same year that World War II began. George Raynor was involved in the war effort and was dispatched to Basra in Iraq. His role, as an experienced sportsman, was to keep troops fit, providing them with physical training to prepare them for combat. While stationed in the Middle East, Raynor was informed that the Prime Minister of Iraq, Nouri al-Said, was aiming to establish a national football team. Raynor was appointed manager of the Iraq national team, who were not initially recognised by FIFA. They were formed as students and members of the armed forces, playing friendly matches against other teams formed of military members. One match Raynor was involved in led to a riot that caused over 200 people to lose their lives. Raynor returned to England in 1945. He formed a friendship with the Secretary of the Football Association, Stanley Roose. Roose was impressed by Raynor's work in the Middle East, and this would help to advance George Raynor's career. Raynor had a brief spell in charge of Aldershot reserves, but was relieved of his duties in 1946. After being briefly unemployed, Raynor had an opportunity that would shape his career. Stanley Roose had been contacted by the Secretary of the Swedish FA to inquire if he had any recommendations for a coach to appoint as head of the national team. Roose recommended Raynor to him. Raynor was offered the job, initially on a temporary basis. He had been at first reluctant to take it on, but was eventually persuaded to travel to Sweden and give the job a go. Many were concerned with the appointment of Raynor, seeing him as an unknown. However, he soon proved he knew what he was on about. He transformed the Swedes tactically, being one of the first coaches to use a false 9 in the system. His impact was soon plain to see, with a 7-2 win over Switzerland in 1946, and multiple wins over the likes of Finland, Norway, Poland and Denmark would follow. Raynor took Sweden to his homeland to face England at Highbury. Whilst the side lost 4-2, they gave England a strong scare. The next year, Sweden would return to England for the 1948 Olympic Games. The core of the team was based around their legendary front line, Nordhall, Gren and Nidholm, commonly referred to as gre-no-li. Sweden stormed their way through the tournament. They defeated Austria 3-0 in the first round before pulverising South Korea 12-0 in the quarter-finals. They defeated Denmark 4-2 in the semi-finals, and at Wembley, in front of 60,000 spectators, they won the gold medal with a 3-1 win over Yugoslavia. It was a significant milestone for Sweden, considering football was still an amateur sport in the country. Sweden's progress greatly benefited their players, with the gre-no-li frontline joining AC Milan, and other players from the squad would also move to clubs in Italy. This proved problematic for Sweden, however. With Swedish football remaining amateur, players were no longer eligible for international selection once they had signed a professional contract. Raynor was asked to improve the Swedish club game alongside his coaching of the national team, juggling separate spells with Gais, AIK and Åtvidaberg with his national duties. Sweden went to the 1950 World Cup with a rather different squad. A defeat to eventual winners Uruguay denied them the chance to clinch a Jules Rimet trophy, but a victory over Spain guaranteed them third place. Just as with the Olympics, many members of the Sweden squad would find professional moves shortly after the tournament. Sweden went to the 1952 Olympics, aiming to retain their gold medal, but they fell at the semi-finals with a 6-0 defeat to the legendary Magical Magyars of Hungary, who went on to win gold themselves. Sweden came home with a bronze medal. In 1953, however, Raynor's Sweden were able to defy the odds and hold Hungary to a 2-2 draw. When this Hungary side would play England at Wembley the next year, George Raynor tried to use his expertise to help his country. Raynor spoke with England manager Walter Winterbottom and told him to use man marking in order to neutralise the threat of Nandor Hideguti. Winterbottom did not take Raynor's advice, and England lost the game 6-3. In 1954, Raynor would leave his job at Sweden and took the high-profile manager's job at Juventus. His time at the Old Lady did not last long, and he was sacked by October, with Juventus heavily trailing league leaders AC Milan. He would take charge at Lazio, who at the time were bottom of the league. Raynor turned things around and led Lazio to a mid-table finish. He would then return home to England, but sadly, he wasn't as highly respected there. He initially joined Coventry City as the assistant manager, but took the manager's job at the third-tier side in January 1956. His time in charge was mixed, with inconsistent form leaving the side well away from promotion. Raynor was demoted to assistant manager, with Harry Warren taking the position of manager. Raynor did not tolerate the demotion for long and would leave in November 1956. In his absence, Sweden's fortunes had been bittersweet. Sweden had failed to qualify for the 1954 World Cup, and as a result, professionalism was finally introduced. This allowed Lidholm to return to international duty, along with other players that Sweden had lost to professionalism. George Raynor would return to the Sweden national team in March 1957. He prepared the squad for the next year's World Cup, of which Sweden would be the hosts. Sweden opened their campaign with a 3-0 win over Mexico, thanks to goals from Ture Simonsen and one from Lidholm. 2 goals from Kurt Hamrin sealed a 2-1 win over Hungary, followed by a 0-0 draw with Wales to take them to the knockout stages. A 2-0 win over the Soviet Union took Sweden into the semi-finals, and a 3-1 win over holders West Germany sealed their spot in the World Cup final for the first time. They would be up against Brazil. The side were managed by Vicente Fiola, and they had a young striker called Pele in their side, as well as the likes of Vava, Garincha and Mario Zagallo. It was to be a tough task if Sweden wished to lift the Jules Rimet trophy. Raynor told his players before the game, if the Brazilians go a goal down, they'll panic all over the show. The game kicked off in the Rosunda Stadium, in front of a crowd just short of 50,000. Sweden took the lead in the 4th minute through Lidholm, who at 35 became the oldest player to ever score in a World Cup final, a record that still stands to this day. Sweden had the lead and were on course to make history, but it didn't last for long. Vava would level the scores in the 9th minute, and he netted again in the 32nd minute. 10 minutes into the second half, Pele truly announced himself to the world. He received the ball and flicked it over a Swedish defender before firing it into the net. The Swedish dream was well and truly crushed when Mario Zagallo scored a 4th. Lidholm would score again for Sweden, but Pele got his second in the 90th minute to make the game finish 5-2. It was a sad ending for the Swedes, but Raynor stayed dignified in defeat, stating, "There is no use in beating around the bush. Brazil were magnificent. They were the masters in a glorious match, played in the finest spirit in a great sporting land." Shortly after the final, Raynor once again made a strange move. He would move to Skegness Town in 1958, a team that were non-league. He would return to Sweden to manage Djurgården for a brief period, and would also return to the Swedish hot seat one more time for a brief period in 1961. Raynor believed he deserved a shot at the England job after the departure of Walter Winterbottom. However, Raynor had caused himself to have an unpleasant relationship with the FA after he published his autobiography, Football Ambassador at Large. In his book, he heavily criticised England for their failings at previous World Cups, recounting how advice he gave the FA regarding England's performances was ignored. Due to the threat of legal action, the book had to be withdrawn from publication. Alf Ramsey was appointed as England manager and would win the World Cup in 1966. George Raynor spent time out of management before joining 4th tier Doncaster Rovers in 1967. He would leave Doncaster the next year, and afterwards he would never manage again. George Raynor died in Buxton, Derbyshire in 1985 at the age of 78. He passed away without a trace, being lost in time and unnoticed by English football, with no obituary in any newspaper announcing his death. George Raynor is the typical genius, unrecognised in his own time. He helped take over an average Sweden side and lead them to an Olympic gold medal in the World Cup final, whilst also building the bridge for Swedish football's transformation into professionalism. Whilst being almost completely unknown back home, he will forever be a legend in Sweden for what he did for the beautiful game. But sadly, with his achievements overlooked in his homeland, one wonders what might have been had he been given a chance at the top level in English football.